We are so thrilled and honored to have everyone here today on Zoom celebrating the amazing Adina Allen's incredible debut book, The Place of All Possibility. I want to share a couple of notes about Iron Press and then share about the book and share about the amazing people who are helping celebrate this work today and who'll be in conversation with Adina. Founded in 2020, Iron Press is an independent publishing platform and interdisciplinary creative studio rooted in Jewish culture and emanating outward. Iron was founded on the deep belief in the power of culture and creativity to heal, transform, and uplift the world we share and build together. I'll say side note, in that line alone, Adina Allen's work is at the pinnacle and center of what we most deeply believe in and are so deeply proud to be able to work on this book and to bring it into the world. And lastly, we publish online and in print, and our goal is to celebrate artists and thinkers who explore the growing edges of collective consciousness through a diverse range of mediums and genres. You can learn more about other things we do, but today, The Place of All Possibility is a paradigm-shifting work that reframes the whole of Torah as a contemporary guidebook for creativity. Drawing from the deep well of Jewish sacred texts and the radical interpretive strategies of ancient rabbis, The Place of All Possibility provides teaching and tools for those who seek to employ creativity as a force of transformation. Putting spiritual wisdom in conversation with contemporary disciplines of art therapy, liberation theology, and creative research, this essential book invites us all to rediscover our place in a world of mutual thriving. Packed with practical exercises to inspire your creative practice, The Place of All Possibility is for all people, from any tradition or none, who want to see a world of imagination, abundance, and joy. The writer and philosopher Bayo Komolafe has called it a stirring sermon in turbulent times. And I am humbled to introduce Rabbi Adina Allen, Pat B. Allen, and Sophie Strand. I'm going to read bios. So that's on the record because these are incredible people. They're shortened. Apologize. And then from there, I'm gonna hand it over to the three of them. So Rabbi Adina Allen is a spiritual leader, writer, and educator who grew up in an art studio where she learned firsthand the power of creativity for connecting to self and the sacred. She is the co-founder and creative director of Jewish Studio Project, an organization that is seeding a future in which every person is connected to their creativity as a force for healing, liberation, and social transformation. Based on the work of her renowned art therapist, Pat B. Allen, thank you so much for being here. Adina developed the Jewish Studio Process, a methodology for unlocking creativity, which she has brought to thousands of organizational and community leaders, educators, artists, and clergy across the country. Pat B. Allen is an author, artist, art therapist, and teacher who connects to creative source through art and writing. Her two books, Art is a Way of Knowing, Shambhala, 1995, and Art is a Spiritual Path, Shambhala, 2005, explore the borders between art, psychology, spirituality, and social action, and are considered classics in the field of expressive arts therapy. And lastly, Sophie Strand, thank you for being here, is a writer based in the Hudson Valley who focuses on the intersection of spirituality, storytelling, and ecology. Her poems and essays have appeared in numerous projects and publications, including Spirituality and Health, Atmos, Rated Way, and Art Papers. She is the author of The Flowering Wand, The Madonna Secret, and the forthcoming memoir in 2025, The Body is a Doorway, as well as the creator of the popular Substack, Make Me Good Soil. Please join us in welcoming and celebrating Adina's work and these amazing speakers. Thank you all for being here, and I will hand it over to them.
Hello. I think you.
Yay. Hi, so glad to be with you.
Hmm.
So this is a conversation, and do you want me to start with just something for you both to kick off with? And then when we get questions from folks who are in presence, then they can add in. Great. Um, all right. Let's see. And I know that this is the first time Adina and Sophie have met, even online. This not quite in person, but almost.
We've
And
cross-pollinated for a long time. So this is the first time that we've been like face to face, but the
face to face.
cross-pollination
Fair enough.
is long. Yeah.
For sure, for sure. And I just want to say that I feel both of you are bringing in so much wisdom that is continuing to sort of interpenetrate every day in what you do and what you write. And both of you have a number of things in common in having creative legacies, having a deep understanding, connection, and passion for nature, and having, I think, a desire to bring something new to everyone um, as a way into spirit, as a way into love, as a way into creativity. So why don't you each, both, whichever one of you wants to start, just talk about like each other. You were doing that right before we started, and it was so beautiful just to hear you talk to each other. So maybe start with that.
Yay, you want me to start, Sophie, and then pass it to you?
Sure. I mean, I was already thinking about what I wanted to just say about, I mean, your work is, there you write about a lot of different things, but the thing about this book that felt so radical to me and so prescient, so timely is why I think everyone should read it and work with it is that we live in a time when we think that truth is stable, that it doesn't grow, and that something is sacred when it becomes dogma, when it can't be questioned. And I think the most radical thing about your book is saying that scripture is like an organism. It has to grow and change, and you have to participate in it. That God's face is your face, that you have to participate in the ongoing sacred evolution of yourself and the world. It takes your creative participation. And that invitation felt so radical and so necessary right now, especially at a moment in time when things can kind of feel foreclosed, like they're bad, they can't be changed. This book, I think, is a practical manual to leading a spiritual and creative life, but I also think it's a it's a socially relevant book. It's about how to participate in something that feels foreclosed. It feels like it can't be changed. We have to participate creatively in this process. So I just wanted to say that. Like it feels like it is an acupuncture needle at this moment in time.
Well, thank you. Thank you for saying that. Um, I was just, maybe I'll just share what I was just starting to share with Sophie and Pat before we all got on this call. But I feel like part of that, the creative ongoing is like, how do we take things from other disciplines, from other points, and like bring them into relationship with one another, allow them to speak to one another so that something new can blossom. And I was just saying to Sophie, I was just looking through my Google Drive of all of the source sheets I have that have wisdom from you from Instagram posts, Facebook posts, Substack. I don't even know if they get to the books. Like there's just, you're so
No, they
creative.
don't. They're just
Poetry from some journals from long ago, and just what it feels like to marry those with a certain line of Torah and then to see what new blossoms. And so, yeah, I'm just feeling incredibly grateful. And I just wanted to start by saying that for how much your writing and thinking has really helped to open up my own. And it is, as you both said, the first time we're meeting face to face like this, but I really do feel this cross-pollination that's been happening from one side of the country to the other, different ecosystems that we're grounded in, different lineages that we come from. But the way that, yeah, your writing has helped my own just like pollinate and blossom. So I'm just really grateful.
well, I'm honored to be a part of your compost heap. I am, and you are very much a part of mine. I mean, one of my greedy questions that I'd love to ask is, can you paint me a picture of some of these early inspirations of books, pieces of art? Like, what are the secret inspirations that are part of what drew you to the creative process? For writers I love, I always want to know, like, what were your favorite books, your favorite musicians, your favorite philosophers?
Wow, that's a great question. I'm like, what about my favorite ecosystems? That's really what
Oh,
I'm
yes,
thinking when you're
favorite
saying
places,
that.
animals. That there you go.
Yeah, I'm. the ocean for sure. Spent a lot of time in the ocean growing up. My parents, after they had me, you can say more about this, but became scuba divers. And then as soon as I was able to, I became a scuba diver and spent a lot of time underwater. And actually, my sort of coming back into Judaism as an adult was during this time looking at doing scientific exploration of juvenile coral populations, like the tiny, tiny, tiniest, and then looking up one day and seeing 100 dolphin just go by in open water. So from the tiniest to this large, and just feeling like the incredibleness of the world. So I was thinking about just ocean and ecosystems, but also the studio ecosystem and growing up in this place where you could be anything and everything. And, I think something that Pat and I were talking about is that you and I think about the interviews I've heard of you of talking about growing up in this household with geese and the stories you tell about like your parents as sort of spiritual leaders and healers and writers. And so I'm curious about each of our contexts and growing up with parents who were doing this sort of creative spiritual work and how that influenced and percolated down. And I don't think it was from a young age that I was like, I'm going to do this thing and I'm going to open up a studio. That really wasn't it. I was really on a scientific path. And it wasn't until later that this became like, oh, this is where I'm being called. So yeah, curious about that for you too.
Yeah, I mean, isn't it interesting how we kind of fall back into our parents' footsteps and we don't really know how it happens? I mean, I love it. I'm exactly where I need to be. But it is curious. I definitely wouldn't have put that on my bingo card. I'm wondering if there was ever a sense of how you tapped into that intuition about coming back to the studio and back to scripture. Like what were the tells in your life that you were going to return to that?
I think, well, I know it was from sort of the intellectual overwhelm and inundation of academic life,
Yeah.
um, and really feeling like in college, taking this year-long graduate level course and feeling like I was at the apex of what that could look like and feel like, and I could get A's on all the tests and memorize all the facts, but I felt completely spiritually and emotionally depleted by it
Huh.
and felt like there was no transformative process happening. And so how could none other than a regurgitation of the facts just in like maybe a smarter dressed up form be what was going to happen? And so what do we do? I think it was from the heartbreak of like, this is what's happening to the world. We're
Yeah.
learning it and regurgitating it, but what are like, and I think also feeling the burnout of like activism of like I'm doing and more
Yeah.
and more and more and just feeling I'm depleted and it's not actually making the change that I want. And so I think the studio and the creative process, yeah, the title of the book it really is the place of all possibility. How do we go? And I think you write about this so much. The place of eros, the place of what lights your soul up, brings you alive, and where are things constantly evolving and unfolding, as opposed to just like this is how it is, and I'm going to tell you how it is, and we're going to be sad about how it is. Where can change and transformation really happen, and how can our own souls be refilled? Because that's the only way that I think the world really is going to change in the direction of like healing and wholeness and peace and justice and all the things that we all dream and want it to be.
Yeah, I was really struck by this part of the book where you talk about how, Moses' story is definitely filled with different creative nodes. But the burning bush is being this great symbol for creativity in that it's what burns but doesn't burn up.
Mhm.
And for me, I was like, that's my piece I need to work with, which is like what lights me a fire but doesn't push me to burnout. And we live in a burnout society that teaches us to extinguish ourselves, to turn ourselves into a commodity. And so something I've been really interested in is how do we create art without immediately falling prey to this culture that says optimize yourself, make it into an object and make it into something that you can sell. So how do you in your own life walk that thin line of having to survive, really wanting to share your work, and also not wanting to burn it up?
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. And I'll just say, I love about you that how your work has evolved and grown and changed of like, I could see, because I'm like, I'm really attached to this part of your work. And now you're going in a direction of like novels and romance. And I'm like, I'm sure I'll follow you there too. I'll follow you anywhere. But, I can see it's like, you've done this one thing good. Keep doing that thing for me because I get a lot out of it. Whereas like, I love that you're leading by this example of like, I'm going to keep following where the muse is calling me and letting that unfold.
I can't help
Um,
it. I always say like, whenever something starts to feel disingenuous, I can't do it anymore. So if I feel like I'm regurgitating what I'm supposed to say, I'm like, oh, I've got to do something different. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and I think that that was certainly the process of writing this book.
Yeah.
Part of why I'm so grateful for Ayin and for this press is just the spaciousness around creativity in Judaism. Some people on this call have heard this story before, but it went on a mainstream publishing route where I was asked to take out a lot of the Jewish content for it to be like sellable. And
Really?
and I
I
was
don't
like,
know what would have been left.
I, well, it'd be like a, creativity book, whatever. And I was like, well, I've never written a book before. I really want to publish a book. Like, I guess I'll try. And then like all energy, all everything, all inspiration just completely like vanished. So yeah, I think there is no other choice, right? But to follow that. Um, in Judaism, we talk about like the Shekhinah, like the indwelling presence of God. Like, when is it there? And when has she been like, peace, like, I'm out of here. And this project is not a home for me anymore. So just trying to notice that and find like where is the resonance and how do we keep coming into the places where resonance is.
That's so beautifully put. Yeah, I think that's so true for me. There are these moments where, there's a Neil Gaiman, and I know it's tricky to mention him right now. There's a Neil Gaiman lecture about creativity where he says nothing he ever did for the money ever made him any money. And I think it's just really great, which is, art doesn't make money in general. Just do what you love and trust that love is a sacred dialogue with your ecosystem. And this piece of work really feels like a love song. It feels like deeply erotic and in a totally animistic, bigger way than anything sexual. It feels like this erotic exaltation in the entire world. I'm wondering, because I know as a writer that the final product and the experience of the reader can have very little to do with the actual writing of it. What is your process like? You're a painter and you're also a writer. So what are the differences in those creative processes and what was it like putting together a book?
That's interesting. Um, well, I wrote the book between 2 and 5 in the morning because I also have two small children and I'm running a nonprofit. But it wasn't like setting an alarm or making sure I got up. It was like, the spirit was just like, you're up, you're excited. Like I couldn't wait. It really was an erotic experience of like, I can't wait to go into the guest room and like have it be really dark and then just like get to see. I know that I'm sure, resonate with that. Maybe at a different time of day, I don't know, but just that feeling of like, I have this like lover that I can't wait to get back to. And there's like a sadness in being done with it, but also like an openness to what the next relationship will be. And this relationship continuing to grow and change with the book as it's out in the world and relates to other people. I think that, yeah, I'm really grateful for the art making practice that I learned from my mom in the studio and that we teach at JSP. I think for me, whereas some people come who are like professional painters or artists and who are using this to like open up that craft for themselves, I think for me, the visual art making process is a way of opening up my theology and my writing. And so that it's all in like a cyclical process of like I do the art making, the writing, and then it leads me into, yeah, what needs to be said in the book. And then the book raises things that then need to be processed through the art. So I love that they can like speak to one another. And I think what made me feel like this was the right book for me to be writing was that a lot of it was just writing down things that I have said a lot or have taught or have become sort of the theology of Jewish Studio Project. But the fact that all kinds of new things came through in the writing process, and not just in my own writing, but Pat and I, my mom, were in deep chavruta partnership working on it together. Whole sections of the book changed doing that. And then also with Eden, my editor at Ayin, like whole new things I had never even thought about, different passages that I'd already spent tons of time with came through. And that's what made me feel like, oh yeah, this is right.
That's amazing. I mean, I'm very curious about your mother-daughter relationship with creativity and what it has felt like to inherit this and also reinterpret it, to participate in a new iteration. I mean, Pat, I'm also curious what it was like to have Adina as a daughter and to see this evolution.
Well, let me just say one thing about that because I often think and don't often say out loud that the work that I received feels like Adina has iterated it and transformed it in a way that is so powerful and in ways that I would certainly never have been able to do, but that I don't know that I could have tolerated if they were done by someone else. So it makes me feel, honestly, like Source is really in on this and like really wanted this to happen and set it up so it had to happen because the changes, what she really did, which I think is so profound, was to reintroduce a seat at the table for the intellect as part of the creative process, but not in charge of the creative process. And I would love for both of you to talk about like the different parts of yourself that show up when you're creating and how do you manage your inner team. I think that would be a fun thing to hear from both of you.
Go, Adina.
No, I want to hear
you. Pat, that's such a great question. I like to think about this kind of simplistic way that people talk about fantasy writing or about writing fiction, which is like discovery writers and architects, or like gardeners and architects. And architects plan everything and they're super cerebral and they want everything to make sense and they have a backstory for everything and they know what every scene is and they sit down and they complete it. Discovery writers sit down each day and they discover something new. I think I'm this really weird blend of both, which is I both abhor academics and love academics. It's part of why this book, Adina, was so delicious to me. Was the etymologies, the scriptures, the rabbinical analysis. Like, I love that. Give it all to me. But I also want there to be sensuality and poetry and a sense of possibility of something new happening, something I didn't expect. And so I think I'm a really interesting blend of an architect who has control issues. I definitely like to feel like I know what's going to happen, but then I sit down each day and say, make room for something new, make room for God, make room for the sacred to interrupt me and to show me that something better could happen. So I think I'm a blend of both, an architect and a discovery gardener. What about you, Adina?
Yeah, that was so beautifully said. I feel the same way. And I think it's just finding the proportionality of each, which can change over the course of what's needed over the course of a day or months or years. But I think starting to notice the small fluctuations in myself when I feel myself tipping towards like an excessive intellectual, pursuit that's like, is that leading me to something that's opening or going to get to a place of feeling? And even in writing about it, like it's not just in service of history or in service of understanding in the sort of intellectual sense, but like, does it land in the heart? It does something open, does something blossom? Is it life-giving? And I think that we can, I don't think we're often invited to read scripture, to read Torah that way, but that feels really important to me that we're entitled to come with that as our intention of like, show me what's life-giving in this.
What allowed you to that radical reframing of scripture? Like, because it feels pretty brave and radical for me. As someone who has sat at the table with rabbis and priests and theologians and philosophers, like this is a pretty radical book. And I'm wondering about the courage where that door opened in you.
I don't know, Mom, I'm curious what you would say, but I think I just took it really literally what our teachers in rabbinical school told us of like, you're the commentators of today. It's your job to like find meaning in this and to help other people find meaning. And in learning sort of Rashi and Rambam and sort of the ancient, very well-known commentators of like coming to see that that is exactly what they were doing. They were taking the issues of their day and their struggles and their questions and their insecurities, and they were bringing it to text and then using that as like a divination tool, basically, to find an answer. And that's what we call commentary. That's what we call, midrash or the Talmud or any of those things. And so I guess like a maybe radical sense of entitlement that like I'm entitled to do that too. But also like that I don't want to be doing anything that doesn't produce, heart opening and feeling, and just feeling myself come alive when my colleagues would do it or teachers would do it. And you're like, ooh, that like moves me. Like, I think ultimately realizing that's all that is the primary thing that the world needs from me right now. Not more like smart ideas. Yeah. What would you say?
I want to just say something about like that, just the erotic nature of that, like that creativity, scripture, like anything that's alive is polyamorous, and that we need to like hold that in some way. And I don't think it hurt that she had a mom who was a convert, but also like painting pictures of Kali a lot of the time. And, just like every door is available.
I was also just struck by, in what you were saying, how it feels like a kind of courtship and urgency that you came to these texts saying, I know you're alive. I know you have things to say. Like, will you play with me? And it's so delicious. It's also so polite. Like it's polite to say you're not dead. You still have things to say. And that feels so potent to me.
Yeah, sort of like the book felt like, maybe you feel this about your works too, like they become an entity in and of themselves. And I think I really got that in the studio from my mom of like how you treat your images, like they're not your images. You open, and Sophie, you talk about this in your work, the body is a doorway, right? Like you are opening as a portal for certain things to come through you, to speak through you, to be made manifest through whatever opening you can provide. And so, yeah, they're not yours and they're not dead. And like, how do you come into relationship and honor them as their own entities? And then feeling like, okay, well, we called Torah Eitz Chaim, we called a tree. Well, a tree has to be alive. It needs inputs, has outputs. And so how do we actually honor, I guess, like, how do we take our metaphors seriously and rigorously in a way that can open new things? And again, that's something I really find and appreciate in your work. And I think has helped me even more to like dig into and open up the richness of the metaphors that are here, as opposed to just taking them at face value. There's so much in them.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think metaphors are like the connective tissue of environments. Like something is like a flower, it's you're tying yourself to a flower. Like we need to be tied together right now. And I think metaphor and poetry is a way of tying things that don't seem to be connected together. And so yeah, metaphoric writing is a type of connective tissue, I think.
Mhm. And instructive and like, okay, so now go deeply into the science of a flower. How do all those parts work? Okay, now what new does that offer us in terms of, you know, how we apply that to our own lives?
Yeah, the curiosity, the potential for something new to arrive, something we didn't expect. Were there things in this process that arrived that were really unexpected? Like what was one big surprise?
Mm. Oh, that's such a good question. I was just having flashbacks to like when Eden told me like this is our final structural, go through. This is your last chance to like make these change whatever changes, and then it's going to go to like just line edits and whatever. And we were away, we were in Hawaii with our family last winter, and I was like, okay, Mom, this is the last one. Let me like read it all. So I like read the entire book out loud to her, and like whole new, I mean, even that thing that you just said about like the burning bush and it not being consumed, that wasn't in there. That just like came through conversation sitting next to the ocean, and like so that there was a whole level of the book that was good and there and made sense, and Ayin felt compelled to publish, but then like a whole new book almost like blossomed, especially with that like intensity of time, and this is almost the end. So I'm really interested in that. And I think, yeah, and then with Eden, who was my editor, like the whole section about the Mishkan, about the tabernacle and the studio and the Beit Midrash both being like these places of all possibility, just like the Mishkan was, where we bring our offerings. That really came through Chavruta with him. So I think just so much partnership, both with the more than human world, but also with the humans that were really a part of shaping this book. Surprises came.
That's beautiful. I also, as someone who thinks a lot about orality and how Judaism was like an oral organismic culture, it was about talking and interrupting and storytelling and breath that tied people together. I love that as you spoke it aloud, as you read it aloud, it came alive. I really think that I
Nice.
always say that when you have to record your audiobook, you should be allowed to edit and change your book because you think better as you actually orally speak it.
Yes, totally. There were definitely things in doing the audiobook. I was like, ooh, can we add a couple things here?
It's such a strange experience. Yeah.
But I appreciate you lifting that up about Judaism. I didn't even think about that like in the orality, but we do say like you in Beit Midrash, in the process of text study, you always read the text out loud because something new happens. And in the art process that I've inherited from Pat, you have the opportunity to read your witness writing, your writing in response to your piece, and the process of making it out loud, just to be witnessed by other people, because in speaking those words out, something new happens and new understanding comes through. So I appreciate you lifting that up.
It's really beautiful. Yeah, it really ties everything back to the body and to the breath. One of my favorite parts is also about the fluttering over the water and the idea of the shimmer and the flutter. Will you talk just more about that? It's so fast. It's such a fascinating portal.
Yeah, so this is the second verb in Torah in the beginning of Genesis. The first is bara, that God creates, and that then God merachafetz, God flutters or hovers above the surface of the deep and the water. And I think the first thing that felt really compelling to me about that is that in a culture of just such productivity focus, to say that if we could say God did this, then we can say we get to do it too, like to just flutter, to just hover, to just be in proximity to something and to see how it affects us and change us without us having to take immediate quote unquote action, and to uplift that as like as an action in the creative process. Um, just having it next to you in the room, just like having your art on the wall. And something I learned from Pat, right? You have your art on the wall. There's art that has spoken to her, decades later and been like, time to become something else. Like if we just stay in energetic relationship to things, that they will shift and change and call to us. But I love what you were just saying about like the shimmer. I think a lot about like the hummingbird's wings, just how much energy and focus it takes to flutter in place, right? The hummingbird is working very, very hard to stay fluttering right above that flower or looking for the next flower. And so I think often not taking action is dismissed as something passive or avoidant, but I think, again, going into that metaphor, into the animal nature of it, it feels actually something that takes a lot of focus and concentration and strength to do.
Yeah, it's also interesting how you recontextualize the silence and the void as actually being like a plenum, full, full. Like the emptiness and the silence and the void are actually so active. And in this culture, we really dismiss those really intense spots. And I think that yeah, it's what we need to be doing right now is we need to be hovering, we need to be going into those still small spots that let something new happen. So that felt potent to me.
And they all feel like uplifting, the feminine, which exists in all of us, but that feels like a feminine action. Also, the deep, the depths, to home, all of those things that have been like derided or dismissed as like, let's just get to speaking in light, because that's the most important thing.
Yeah.
But saying, wait, what else is here that has been dismissed or derided that has something very important to offer us?
Yeah, and that, God comes and is creative, but then the materials were there. I loved that little part. I was like, yeah, where did they come from? Yeah. So there's us, and then there's always something else. And I do think I really enjoy how you weave this kind of animist, scientific mode of thinking through your work. And I wonder if you could say a little bit more about your relationship to naturalism and ecology, and what plants and animals were part of this process for you.
Yeah. Well, I loved, I was instructed by the way you would talk about, I've listened to so many of your podcasts, and they've been in my ears on many of my walks in this ecosystem. So, how you talk about yourself as a walker and all the ecosystems that have informed you. So, definitely thinking about, yeah, the hills behind my house and the many different, this was a multi-year process of writing the book. And so, when I walked through those hills and it felt like this project was like dead in the water and nothing was going to happen with it and no one would publish it. And then when it, yeah, stagnant, and then when it rebloomed, and then it was like maybe an excitement. So just getting to feel like watch the plants blossom and change in the hills behind my house. I'm pointing behind me, but we're at the foothills of the Berkeley Hills, and getting to walk up to the top of the mountain and be able to see then all of Marin and San Francisco and the bay and the bridge, Golden Gate Bridge in the distance, and the sky above and the sunsets, just feeling like all of those were instructing me in ways that I probably don't even know or can't put words to, but also just holding me through the many-year process of the different phases and iterations of this project.
How many years was it? I'm curious.
Well, I'm curious how you answer that, 'cause I'm like, I don't know, a lifetime, but
I know, right?
you've probably been writing The Body as a Doorway for, decades, but 3 or 4 years, but it went through one whole phase, and then it was like, this isn't going to happen because I can't take the Jewish out of it and no one will publish it. And then at that time, Ayin was kind of coming on the scene. And then it was like, oh, maybe there's another version of this book that can really be what it wants to be, because there's a publisher who's interested in both of those things, the creativity and the Judaism and spirituality.
Yeah, it's interesting how you were just talking about the Pat having this art up on the wall and then taking it down and working on it years later. And I think like the really profoundly creative work is to come back to something and to do it again or to change it. And to be willing to imagine things differently. And
Yeah.
that's what we need writ large right now is this ability to take what we think of as being complete and to redo it. Um, yeah.
Yes.
How are you, what role is creativity playing in your life right now in this moment in time? How are you accessing your burning bush that does not eat itself up?
That's a great question. Um, I want to pause first just to hyperclick on the returning as you were just talking about
Yeah.
it, because yeah, just lifting up how important that is in Jewish tradition of like chazara, like to return in the practice of just Jewish text study, that often it's like you're trying to memorize it, but you're relearning it. You're relearning it. It's reteaching itself to you. And also just thinking about the cycle of Torah reading, like that it's not a book that opens and closes. It's a scroll that continues to scroll. And as soon as you get to the last word, it cycles back to the first. And so right in the creative process, in the ongoing creation of the world, there is no beginning and no end. There's no front cover and back cover, right? It's an ongoing, ever evolving spiralic scroll. um, and I think that gives me some sense of like hope and possibility in the moments when it feels like this is the end, or this is, that it's always spiraling on itself. And you were asking about return, you were asking about the creative process in my life right now.
Yeah.
My creative process is really around, I mean, I'm doing writing, and there's another book that's brewing, but making source sheets, which for those who are familiar with Jewish tradition on this, call will know what I mean. But basically it's a sheet of paper with like, here's some different texts coming into conversation with each other and some questions. And each one of those feels like, I don't know, an offering to community, but also an offering to God, and a like, again, as we were talking about in the beginning, taking pieces from disparate places and recombining them and trying to see what might blossom, what's fertile here. So right now I'm working on one about gratitude and truth telling and challenge, and how those things are in relationship to one another. But that really feels like a place where my creative process is blossoming.
Hmm. Yeah. Do you go through periods of time where you have to lie fallow and let things settle? Like what does it feel like when things become a little difficult?
Yeah, I got to go for some more walks, I think.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting that it's about moving the body through actual space? I sometimes think that mind is a territory, and if to get to a better thought, I'm gonna have to walk to it. That's usually true for me.
Yeah, yeah. Change up the landscape, either external or internal, in whatever way that we're able to. And walking isn't always possible and not possible for everyone, but how do we switch that up for ourselves and just get some sense of perspective and like new inputs and fresh air, metaphorically or literally. But also we were talking before this call, you and I, but like a lot of your Substack, a lot of the books that you recommend, those are, when I'm fallow, I feel like I'm just like eating all these ideas and then just seeing like how they get digested in me. So I have this practice right now of reading these sort of scientific spiritual philosophy books while I'm at synagogue. And it's actually really hard because you have to really focus because all these other things are happening. And I'm like absorbing them, but also blocking them out to try to focus on the book. And it's my only time to read because I have two small kids at home. But it's like a very spiritual practice for me. They're my shul books, as some people call them, my synagogue books. But and then just feeling like what is going to be the exciting connection between whatever the Torah portion is and whatever I'm reading right now that I would have never planned went together, but how might they speak to each other? So that's been a fun creative practice.
I love that. I think that's my favorite type of synchrony is when two ideas kind of rub together in the wrong way or the right way. You're reading a book and then you read another book and they start talking to each other and you're just kind of the interlocutor between them.
Totally,
Um,
totally.
yeah.
Yeah, Pat?
I just want to throw in that there's a question that's come up from folks in the audience that maybe each of you might want to talk about. There's a couple coming now. They've been invited. Can you talk more about how the practices in the book are affecting how you respond to this really tumultuous political moment?
Yeah, sure. That's for me, I guess. Yeah. Um, the Jewish studio process has been really important for me in this really activating time, and I think is all the more important in times of overwhelm and activation, not as a way of detaching from the world or distancing, pretending like nothing's happening, but as a way of letting myself or whoever uses it, letting ourselves be a vessel through which whatever particular aspect of what is happening in the greater collective can be understood and transformed through us. And I think that we each have a piece or many pieces to do, and they're not the same pieces. And so while there's change that needs to happen politically, economically, et cetera, I think the part that feels most resonant for me is the change that at first or primarily or alongside that has to happen like metaphorically, spiritually, mythically. And so I think about this process as a way to help, like, what are the stuck ideas, metaphors, frameworks that we're in, and what piece of that can I transform through the unique vessel that is me? So yeah, each of us has sites for that ongoing aliveness and transformation to happen through us, little vessels for that, through which to happen. Sophie, I'm curious what it sparks for you.
Well, just hearing you talk, and I'm thinking about your work, I was thinking about how when you don't feel like you have the agency to tell the story, when you get caught up in cultural stories that don't have your best interests in mind. And so I think it goes back to what you're saying, which is it's incredibly powerful to say, no, you are an author of your own story and other stories, and you do not have to just take the dime store novel that's being offered to you that was not written for you. And so I do think it's a really tectonic shift when you begin to realize that you can craft the story of your own life, and you can tell it differently. You can recast yourself, and that may not actually have immediate material like effect. It may not even show up immediately, but it affects your immune system. It really, as someone who's chronic illness, I always think about, like, the stories we tell really do affect how we inhabit our bodies. And I want to be a safer place for other beings and other people at this time. I do think it's not a time where a lot of people will feel safe. And if I can tell a story of me being as wide as a mountain, as soft, as spacious, as able to hold complexity and nuance and different ideologies, if I can tell that story, maybe other people will be able to land in me.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah.
There's another question that is very related to what you two have been just talking about. And it starts with, could you both talk about the relationship between transcendent and immanent language for divinity, and perhaps particularly Sophie's image of Jesus not and yet needing to return to earth in the flowering wand, or of the femininity of darkness, the deep, and the waters in the beginning in relation to God fluttering. And I think also I would like to throw in there, if you could talk about the fact that these stories, which many people may think, are irrelevant, I don't believe in them or whatever, that we're all swimming in them, and how that affects us, whether we wish it to or not. So, yeah.
That was something I wanted to thank you also back on the question before, that I think more than any of us might acknowledge, especially if we don't identify as religious or a part of a specific tradition, that these stories underlie everything in our culture, but also in our own psyche, whether we believe them, quote unquote, or not. And, this is one of the places where I quote Sophie in the book, but that we can't actually effectively excise anything. Like, you can't say, okay, let's pretend that's not there. Like, we're never going to look at that again. It just doesn't work, I don't think, psychologically, spiritually. And so, Sophie, what you offer, and we can like add to the ongoing compost heap of collective meaning. And so that's what I want to do. I want to continue adding, what are the things that are like the nutrients that can help neutralize and then let other things blossom and grow. The things that have been, or at this point are now, harmful or destructive in whatever way. And so, I mean, I write about, Adam and Eve and the tree, but it's like, wow, if we are wondering where demonization of like women, the body, eating, animals, trees, snake, I mean, all change, right? If the snake represents change and transfer, all of those things are encapsulated in that one story. So you could say, great, Torah or the Bible sucks, let's not read it. You could, there's all kinds of ways that you could relate to that, but it's still there and it's still like in us. in each of us and all of us as sort of like a larger collective organism. And so how can we, and I think Judaism invites us really beautifully, the chazara, the return to work with, rework with, meld, change, squeeze out of like what is in here that we can bring forth new meanings that can be enlivening and supportive and safer for us today.
Yeah, that feels like such an incredible example. I mean, it was growing up alongside some of my Jewish family members and my dad talking about midrash and this idea that you could retell the stories that everyone says are just how the stories were. I remember hearing about that and I was like, "Oh my God, wow." And I do think that's a really important thing to do is to keep retelling the stories because we can't get rid of them. They're in us. They're in our epigenetic triggers. They're baked into the culture. I mean, science is in a lot of ways just rearticulated Christianity and some of the worst parts of it. So we need to, I do think it's important to do a kind of paranoid reading of certain texts. If you're a minority who's not, the texts weren't being written for, it is, like, who is writing this? What did they want politically? And then we can compost them. I think it's the collective compost heap of all melding together, but not subtracting anything, not getting rid of it. I mean, I love pieces of scripture, I love books, I love stories, and I love myths that have complicated lineages. And the way I continue loving them is by planting them with seeds and putting enough in there that they can sprout something healthier.
Totally. And I'm surprised, not that I'm old, but at this juncture in my life, being 41, I'm interested in noticing for myself things that I wished had been excised that now I'm like, I actually find something really meaningful, which wasn't the way it was being given to me, but I actually find something that's very useful here that I didn't think would have been useful 10 years ago. And so just, yeah, having a longer view of time, of ourselves, and adding our energy and attention to the places that feel generative and alive, but not excising out anything.
Yeah, you wrote about how disposability culture doesn't realize that you're looking at a studio of art materials. And I loved that. Like, we live in a throwaway culture, and that means we're not making use of our best paints. And so there's a really beautiful reframe of like we can use this to make something new.
That makes me think like if we go to a workshop somewhere, have to order supplies, like new supplies for the workshop, the difference between just having like brand new watercolor sets and ones that have been used, as well as like now I'm always trying to bring cut up old art from the studio where I go because again, I just accrued meaning. It's not just on text, it's also in supplies and materials and just how much that changes what's possible. Messiness, accrued energy, someone has used these before, both in materials of paints, but also in text. So
it's a beautiful thing. Yeah, we're always in conversation with the materials. Yeah.
Got a couple of more questions here, and I think we have a little less than 10 minutes or so. I'll leave it to Ian to bring us to close. But Adina, curious if you've heard feedback from readers who are not deeply rooted in Jewish learning or texts and how they've responded and reflected on the role of Jewish teachings in the book. Anything this has to teach us about how the particular and the universal speak to one another.
Yeah, what a great question. Thank you. Yeah, it's been amazing to have people who aren't from Jewish tradition come to book talks and really resonate. I've had a number of people who grew up Catholic saying like, I was told that God was an all-powerful man who was there to punish me, and this has opened up all kinds of, new possibility and facets of like who and what God could be. And what was the other part of the question? Oh, what the particular and the universal? It just feels so important and pertinent to me right now, both that Judaism has incredible gems of wisdom that I really hope can be of service beyond the insularity of the Jewish world. And for so many different reasons and facets, both of the past, but also in the present, I think there are roadblocks against that. But I think we're in need of the wisdom of all great traditions, and Judaism has many to offer, both in like gems of Torah and like that kind of textual wisdom, but also in practice, and specifically thinking about Beit Midrash, the centrality of the house of inquiry, and Chavruta of paired learning in which we're in dialogical, dialectical interaction with one another over text. that practice can be used with any kind of text. I use Sophie's text, I use Bio's text, I use Emmanuel Cosio's text, like any kind of text we can bring our shared attention to, unpack, turn around, take apart, re-put back together. And what might that technology, that practice have to offer beyond Torah to all of us? And also not just with text, but how we see ourselves, how we see each other, how we read the newspaper headline and the stories that are being fed to us by the dominant culture. So I think both the particularities of Judaism have some beautiful things to offer right now, and also like the practices that can go far beyond just these texts and tradition.
Another aspect of that question has come in response to the comment, we can't excise anything. When it comes to community and relationships in times of fracture, how to stay in relationship or communities with people we deeply disagree with, how to expand our capacity for discomfort.
Yeah, that's great. I can go, but Sophie, do you want to start or you want me to?
I have a really simple answer. And honestly, these days I'm certain of less and less. I am no expert in anything. I'm a lover. But there's one thing that I think helps, which is sharing food and doing activities rather than relying on a kind of psychotherapeutic model always. Talking things through sometimes doesn't help people. If you're never going to agree, you come from different backgrounds, talking will never get you to a good place. But do you like hanging out with animals, hiking, and do you like making food together and eating? Sharing food with people who live in my actual community is like my spiritual practice. It is my temple, it is my church. I have to do it every week. Yeah, it actually started with a group of friends who were mainly Jewish. We called it our Sabbath, but then it expanded, and then many other people were coming, and it was a whole different thing. But yeah, I think sharing food, doing things that are not about analysis, about proving anything. Can we just honor that we need to eat to stay alive, and we all were born with bodies that love certain tastes and love to enjoy food together? My answer.
I love that. I was thinking of that maybe more in the metaphorical though, like maybe back to what I was saying before of like, there are different ideas, concepts, metaphors that each of us can eat and digest because of our immune system and our like, maybe we can't do gluten, whatever that metaphor is, or we can't do dairy, but like there's something that each of us can digest and transform. And so first of all, I think a number of the books, Sophie, that I've read that you've recommended help me understand us not as individual organisms, but actually almost like an ant colony. Like we are all little parts of this big greater thing. And so that helps me, that like we're not separate and apart. We're actually all part of a greater, and we're each doing some aspect of that greater being's life. And that we each have a role to play. And again, I think there's a lot of humility in that. Like, we haven't figured out the answers. We do not have the answers. If we did, they would be happening. And so what is the role that I can play, and how can each of us support each other and respect each other in doing the work that we need to do? And so I think about in the studio, we talk a lot about parallel process. Again, it's different and not, let's have a dialogue across difference. I'm not a huge fan. I think it's just like, I feel this, you feel this. Okay, we can be polite maybe, but it's not going to shift or change me. But if I can be at the wall in conversation with my own soul, and you can be at the wall in conversation with your own soul, and I can see and you can feel that I'm doing whatever the deep work is I have to do, even though you don't know exactly what it is and maybe can't understand it, there's a deep level of respect and of non-personal love that can happen. And yeah, that feels really important in this time.
I love that. I also love the metaphor is like we can all digest different types of metaphors. Yeah, it's true.
Yeah. And I don't want a world where we're all trying to force each other to do the same thing. Yeah. Is there one last one? Are we closing? Or I just want to talk forever, but
I know. Well, I hope that someday we can, our book tours, our books can send us to each other. The Hudson Valley is very open to you. To you both. I know my mom would love to have a meal and invite everyone.
We would love that. And just to say that Pat introduced me to you from your mom's work, from Perdita's work, and your dad, and was like, I really think you should follow this person on Facebook. They're really writing some great things. And then it took me a little while, and then I did, and I was like, oh my God. And then we just have text threads that are just each of us sharing your writing to each other, being like, did you see this? And like, did you listen to this podcast? And you've been in our hearts and in our minds and ears. And yeah, I just am so
Well,
grateful.
same. I mean, finding your work, I was like, someone is like having this scientific animistic experience with the Jewish scriptures. Oh my God. Like I was really, yeah, that was exactly my alley. Um, do we have time for one more question?
I think we do have time for one more question, and
Great.
there are some pretty juicy ones. So,
Great.
if you want to choose or guide.
And can you both see those just so you could make a choice, or do you?
Let's see.
I just see one in chat, which I can say if you're overwhelmed by being in groups of people, that you can do the process of digesting, incorporating, transforming. I think holding the consciousness that other people are also doing this when you don't have to be in physical proximity to one another, and also doing it online. I actually prefer to be in the online studio sometimes more than the in-person studio. It's overwhelming to be with a lot of people and to have all that energy in one space. So I really love that I can feel connected to and a part of a greater whole virtually, and then also be in the safety and comfort of my own space. So just invite that either it's physically, literally, but also you can hold that in your consciousness.
Yeah, I like that reminder. I'm also, as someone who's disabled, sometimes I can't leave, sometimes it's dangerous to be in big groups, and I think that Zoom has been a really beautiful way of being like with hundreds of people, but
Yeah,
like in a very intimate way because we're all kind of like weaving together our interior homes.
exactly. Yeah.
I really don't want to interrupt this conversation, so we could do another question. We can close.
Adina, is there a question that you're dying to answer?
Oh my gosh. I don't think so. I just, like I said, if writing this book was just so that you and I and Pat got to have a conversation together, I'm so grateful. And I'm really grateful to everyone who's here and to Ayin. And to say, like, I'll read for anyone who's here because you've read my work or know me, like, read Sophie's work, bring the two in dialogue, bring her work in dialogue with other things that you're doing. And I'm just, yeah, I guess maybe just to end with like a blessing for all of us, that we, yeah, feel the call to the work, to the play, to the love that's ours to do and give in this world, and that we follow what feels enlivening and soul igniting for us, and trust our own heart's desire and calling, and trust those around us, and feel that we're never ever doing what we're doing in isolation, but we're always held by a greater whole of which we're all a part.
This was such an honor. Pat and Adina, getting to be part of your mother-daughter duo, yeah, this was really a very magical thing for me. Thank you. And everybody should get this book. And we are about to enter into holiday season, birthday season, Valentine's Day. This is a book that is good for any occasion.
Thanks, Sophie. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much. Thanks, Mom.
Thank you.